Yerushalmi Kilayim, we are holding at Kol Haloshon base. So now we were talking about the word zeru'eha and how you had 5 species which were planted in a 6x6 tvachim grid. So Rav Chagai said zeru'eha chamisha. The word zeru'eha doesn't have a vav, so it's got 5 letters. If I find a vav, I erase it. It's a mistake, and that's why 5 letters tells you the idea of 5 species growing in it. So there was a question they asked Rav Huna. He was the sofer over there when they studied various psukim. They said, how is the word spelled? He said, Zeru'eha Malia. It's a full word with a vav, not without a vav, not like Rav Chagai. Okay. Now that is no discussion about 5 species in a 6x6. Rabbi Yochanan Shem Rabbi Yanai. Kulan b'tech shisha. So all the 5 are in the 6x6 tvachim area. Right, and there's 5 species allowed, right? Kahana b'shem Rishon Lakish, he said kulan chutz l'shisha. The Mishnah's din is even if they're all on the sides, they're planted outside the 6x6 area, and even then you can only have 5. So he says here 5 can be planted within the patch, but what he's saying is not only when the 4 species are just within the patch, but even if they're planted just outside the 6x6. Right, so you got 4 species just outside the area, separated from another maybe by 1.5 tvachim. Even so, you can still only have 5 in total. Okay. Now, what about Rishlakish? In Kulen Chusla Shisha, but if they're all going to be outside the 6x6, then this Nitisha, then you should be allowed to have 9 species, like 8 all the way around. There's much more space around the 6x6, and you can still have your 1.5 tefach gaps. So there should be 8 all the way around, and 1 in the middle, right? Yeah, I mean, even if you're using the outside, why only 5? I mean, why not have more? So what we got here? We're talking about we use the interior, okay. So Rav Tanchum answered, and that's right, that when you're planting just outside, you can have 9. But Baruga Shabaruga Simasnisa. The Mishnah couldn't say that because we're talking about a case where the garden patch is amongst other garden patches. Therefore, you can only have 5, because if you have any more outside, they're going to intermingle with the species of the other adjacent patches. So then they'll be too close to the patches on the outside of the adjacent patches. And that's why you can only have 5. But if it was a patch on its own, then you really could have more. If you look in the art scroll, they show you how you've got 1 aruga with the bits around the side, then 1 at the next aruga, you can have a bit in the middle. Okay. Rish Lakish, however, was okay with it. Even if there's other patches around, you can still have 9, because if you do it in a way, it depends how you arrange the patches of all the others. Wait, one second. He said you shouldn't have 9, you should have 5. Yeah, and the problem is they're right next to each other. Okay, yeah. They could sometimes appear distinct as well, and you've got the diagrams. It depends how they are next to each other. It could be the spaces where one is from here, the other one doesn't have it that side. So there are different inyanim there. Okay, let's move on. Okay. There's a bit about it in Shabbos. Yeah. Ayala Gavol. Now, so we spoke about a 6x6 tvachim patch, a slightly different din. What happens if a patch has got a raised border surrounding it that's a tefach high? So Yitzchok, Ravim, Abi Yasvin, they were sitting, Magsha, they asked the following question. Tanina, we've learned, if you've got a raised border surrounding area, it's tefach high and a tefach wide. So the patch is now really 8x8, okay? Because it's 6x6. Then you've got a border which is 1 tefach high and 1 tefach across. So it's the area, you can even show things on the border as well, right? So it's now 8x8. Zoyim b'seicha shlosha asa. You can plant 13. Shlosha al kol govel v'govel. 3 on each border, ve'achad be'emsa, and 1 in the middle. So 3 on each border surrounding the 6x6 and 1 in the middle. Okay? Now the Mishnah said that when you've got a small patch without a border, you can do 5. But in this case, where you've got a border, and the Mishnah says, well, you can only have 1 in the middle. Why is that? Why not have 5 in the middle? right? So you'll end up with 12 all the way around and 5 in the middle, makes 17. So my answer is Tifta, Shahagoblin Mamatin Shisha. We're talking about a case where the stuff which is growing on the borders reduces your 6 by 6 area, right? So you can only have one species planted there, because the goblin are what's on the borders is coming and encroaching on what's on the middle. Okay, it's not like a case without a border. When there's no border, 6 by 6 is available, so you can have 5 things growing. When you've got a border which has 12, you can't use the whole 6 by 6 area because you need 1.5 tefachim between stuff on the border and one's in the patch. So your available space becomes 3 by 3 tefachim, and in that you can't have more than one species allowed. Okay. They say here the problem is with the word tifta, which the Gemara uses. Usually, in the sense like tifta is like hachaba ma'askinan, you find in Bavli. We're talking about a specific case. According to some here, the idea of one species in the patch surrounded by a border is in every case. There's no case where the 6 by 6 can be used when it's surrounded by a planted border. So it's not a one-off case. But the Gemara still uses the word tifta. Okay, so some say we're talking about a case where the leaves of that planted on the border extend into the patch and they're reducing the planting area of the 6 by 6, which is more what I referred to before. That is what's growing on the border is encroaching on the central 6 by 6. Okay. If the species on the borders are reducing your planting area of 6 by 6, on this we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says you can have 6 in the middle. In the actual patch, you're going to end up with 18, 12 on all sides and 6 in the middle. But if you don't really have the whole complete patch available, how can Rabbi Yehuda allow you to plant 6 in the middle? How can he do that? Right? It sounds like Rabbi Yehuda is speaking even where there's a patch with a border. Because the Mishnah uses his din at the end of the Mishnah, after we quoted the Tanna Kamma's view about the case. I mean, if he's talking about an ordinary patch, he should have just said 6 species. But no, but he said 6 in the middle, implies that he's talking about a patch with a border. So how can, you're going to have 12 in the border and 6 in the middle in such a small area? So the Kayam Nuha, to solve the problem, they said, Lo Yadin, but we tried to explain it, we don't know who exactly, whether Chachamim worked it out or Ravimi worked it out. Al Rosha, that when you're talking about 6, is permitted in this actual patch. He's talking about a case where there's no border, the first part of the Mishnah, right? There's no border around. Rabbi Yehuda allows you 6, arguing with the Tanna Kamma who allow 5. But if it's a patch with a border, then Rabbi Yehuda agrees you can only have 1 planted in the actual patch, right? You can't have 5 in such a case, you can only have 1. Right? So the Tanna Kamma and Rabbi Yehuda agree you can only have 1 species in the patch when it's surrounded by a border. Okay. But if we put us talking about the case where at the beginning of the Mishnah, how is it about this? Rabbi Chia taught in a Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda said you can have 18 in the patch. Now, how are you going to get 18? It can't be a case of a 6 by 6 tefach patch. It can't be that. So it must be, if Yehuda is allowing 6, it's not just an ordinary patch, it's one with a border around. So you have 12 all the way around the border and 6 in the middle. That's how you get 18. And even then, he's allowing 6 in the middle. Together with the 12 on the border brings you 18. So the question comes back, why is Yehuda allowing you 6, even with a patch with a border? Right? In the Tanna Kamma, they said, no, there's a difference between an ordinary patch and an non-ordinary patch. With a border, without a border. So it's a very good question. We have no answer. Okay. He says, some want to say that you're assuming that 1 tefach high to the border is not a 1 tefach gap. So we don't know why, we're reducing the area of the patch according to the Tanna Kamma, not according to Rabbi Yehuda. Some say the tefach height is also a tefach separation. But according to the Tanna Kamma, it's not good enough because you need 1.5 tefach, you see? All right, let's carry on. Now, what about a special din of a species in a small area? Ma'ola kriach beis rova. Are you allowed to clear out an area the size of a beis rova, and plant within it 5 types of grain? Okay, so really a beis rova is what 6 by 6 is with Yerokas. With Yerokas, you need 6 by 6 machrim gap. With grain, you need a beis rova. How much is beis rova? Who can remember? 10.2 times 10.2, right? So therefore, if you've got, let's say, an unplanted base rover in the grain, that's like the gap. So the question is, can we allow you to have 5 species of Eurocus in a 6x6? So maybe the same question with grain. 5 species of grain in a base rover, okay? I mean, really, there's only 3 categories of grain, really, with Yitzchok Kilayim. But the Gemara means 5 species of any seeds which are not called Eurocos. That's the question. So, Mala Kriach Beis Roba. What's the din whether you can clear out an area of land types Beis Roba, Zorba Saicha, Chamisha Netua, and plant 5 types of grain? Ma'im Shisha. If we're ready with 6x6. Shalaikin Olad Vater, we can get lashes for that if things are growing next to each other, an unplanted area. Vegetables close together, 6x6, less than 6x6, you get lashes. Nevertheless, you say you're allowed to have 5 species of Eurocus within that area. Like in a lot of Torah. Here, we don't get lashes in our Torah when you're leaving less than the amount of space. Like Hashikain, how much more so 5 species of grain should be permitted within that area. Then the next question. Now, what's the din if you're clearing out an area? Okay, you're clearing out an area of 6x6 fachim in, let's say, the beginning between 2 fields of vegetables, but then it sort of narrows, right? It is 6x6 in one area, but then it starts narrowing. So what's the din? Now, we're going to say like this. Of course, it should be fine. Why? In an area where, things get nourishment from things which are nearby, right? Let's say 5 species and a 6x6. That's permitted. Here, when you have 2 fields, one cultivation doesn't affect your other one. Like Koshkin, how much more so will be permitted with your sort of 6 tfachim gap, even though it gets a bit smaller. What is the question, right? You don't have to ask that. There's no need to, you don't have to ask questions about that. What will you need to ask questions? What's the din? Can you clear out an area measuring a base rover in between, let's say, the beginning of 2 fields of grain, and then it narrows and narrows? That's the problem. It narrows until they meet. So it says over here, so you need a base rover to separate between 2 fields of grain, right? 104 square amas. Eurocus only needs 6 tfachim. But whether the colour of vegetables, which allows you 6x6 to get narrower and narrower, whether that applies with grain as well or not, okay? So the base rover would be needed, maybe at first you need a base rover, and then gradually get smaller until the fields meet. You follow? So it's all very well with vegetables, 6x6 can get shorter and shorter, but can a base rover with grain get shorter and shorter? Okay? Very good question, I'm afraid. We don't have, well, the Gemara does see an answer. Ma'im shisha, shalaikin ala dvar Torah. Well, 6x6 tfachim, you can get lashes having vegetables closer than that. Atamamuta, you say that it's permitted to have 2 fields of Eurocos, as long as they are separated by that distance. Can't she'ain like in ala dvar Torah. So here, base rover, there's definitely no malchus from Torah. So like Kosh again, how much more so, the 2 fields of grain can be next to each other. As long as you have a base rover at first, then it gradually gets less and less. It's absolutely fine. So we have a kula at the end of the day with all these dinim. So you can have 5 species in a base rover. 6 tfachim are needed between Eurocus at the beginning. It can get gradually smaller. After leaving an unplanted area of 6x6, the area may narrow until the fields meet. You need a base rover between fields of grain at the beginning. Well, after you've left that, it can gradually get narrower and narrower again until the base rover, until the fields meet again. Yeah? Okay. Now back to a 6x6 tfachim patch, and you've got a border around it. The border is 1 tefach high and 1 tefach wide. So we said you can have 12 around the border. Now, Rav Nasa Shah, surely it makes more sense, but Gaga shall go shnei tfachim. Maybe if a raised border, if it was sort of 2 tfachim wide, the border, the top, mutil Israel by shnei minin. You can have 2 species there, one maybe next to the other, and you can have, maybe if it's 2 tfachim wide, the border, maybe you can have 2 there, and you'll end up with 24 all the way around, not 12. Very good question. We have no answer. Some say it was a rhetorical question, and he's actually saying this is the fact, and it's permitted. And that sha'al here just means a statement, rather than actually asking a question. Okay, next one. Rav Nasa sha'al, asa pe'ah be'emsa. Right, a pe'ah, Rabbi say, what's a pe'ah? Any offers? You come across it in Shabbos, no? A pe'ah in Yerushalmi terms is a tzuras ha'pesach, a doorway, a string going across. That's what a pe'ah is in Yerushalmi wording. So Rav Nasa sha'al, asa pe'ah be'emsa. If you put maybe poles in the ground at four corners of a 6x6, and you make a string going across, so you've cordoned off an area of 6x6 in the middle of a field. Zara begai masin, and then you planted a different species in that area. Mishchai bekama. How far must that go? That species. So he says here, do you have to plant the whole 6x6? Do we say it's surrounded by other species? So whatever's planted there can't be separate unless you plant the whole 6x6. And if not, maybe it's not good enough to be considered a distinct area. Or maybe, as long as you cordon off the 6x6, the planted area is separate, even if only a section of it is actually planted. You follow? So you're sort of setting aside this area. Do you need to plant the whole area or not? Okay. Some learn the reading is begumasin. Some say there's a question about whether you can have species in a small patch with a tzuras pesach, maybe a hole in the patch, and whether our mission, which allows species on the border and on the patch, applies to a patch which is smaller than 6x6. Okay. Right, where are we now? Zara begumasin mishcha bekama min mada Rav Yitzchok Ravimi. That which he said, they said, right, you can only have one species in 6x6 because the border takes away part of your area. So you see, the cordoned off area can be planted with a different species from that which is surrounding it, although you're not planting the whole 6x6. This tells you the 6x6 cordoned off area is permitted even if less than that is planted. It doesn't have to be planted the whole way through. Okay? Even though you've got areas which are reduced by that which is on the border. Now, how far can you go with this 6x6 that you don't have to plant the whole thing? We learn from the following. A hole in the ground, a tefach deep. It's a tefach wide, a tefach long. You can plant in the whole 3 types of seeds. One on the outside edge of one side. One the opposite outside edge of the other side. And one in the middle. Right? Now the one in the hole, now what was this? Basically we're putting it in the hole, it's completely planted, it's a domain to itself, and they're all distinct areas. This tells you can reduce the planting area of 6x6 until it's only a tefach. Right? If you want to plant an area smaller than that, then it's forbidden. Okay.
Is that really large? So tefach is only so big. If you make a hole like that, plant seeds there.
And how are you going to get on the side?
The seeds going on the side are going to plant out. The seeds coming up here, they're going to come up looking.
Well, they'll go away. They're on the outside of this hole. They'll face away from it. Let's see what they say here.
It will just look.
See what they say.
Come up
if you got less than the one area in the hole would be planted, we wouldn't consider all 3 planted areas distinct areas. You wouldn't be able to plant different species in this manner. When a complete 1x1 area is planted, everything around it are distinct areas, and you can be permitted to be planted in the manner described. So 1x1 planted area is considered distinct. Okay? So a 1x1 area must be planted for the planted area to be considered a separate domain. Okay?
That's logical.
Right. Huh?
That's logical. We're saying here 1x1, he's wanted to plant three different seeds.
One on the outside, one on the outside, and one on the inside.
It's a hole.
It's a hole, yeah. Somehow there's one on the outside. Now, it's obviously not a hole underground. Otherwise, how are you going to plant one on the outside?
No, it's a wall. You stick
unless you plant it underground or something, yeah. Okay. Now we're talking about another din. 4 species can be going in a hole, 1 tefach deep, where they're all facing a different direction. The Now 4 types of seeds can be planted where the plants are leaning towards the barren area. They're all leaning away from each other. Otherwise, you can't plant them like that. So he says here, the right section of the Brisa. So he's telling you one type of seeds in a 1 tefach hole, one on each side, only 2 sides of the hole according to Rish Lakish. The other 2 must be unplanted. Okay, discussion is it all sides, just 2 sides? Right. Amar Rav Zira. Rav Zira said, now back to our discussion about a tefach wide border surrounding a 6x6. Kol tefach or tefach shall govel, also it's a mokum b'fnei atzmo. Each and every tefach of a border, a raised border, is considered a separate area. But then if that's the case, you should allow 25 in the case of the Mishnah in the 6x6. Why? Shisha kol govel b'govel, 6 on every border, ve'echad be'emsa, and 1 in the middle. Let's allow 6 on each side, and 1 in the middle is 25. Why is the Mishnah only allowing 13? V'cheinu. Now, is that the case? Is that what it is? Maybe the 6 should be allowed on each border, so you should have 25. He asked him, he says, we've learned, you've got like a channel, a water channel, a furrow, that 1 tefach deep, you can throw 3 types of seeds, 1 on one side of the channel, 1 in the middle. Why does Mishnah say 3? It should tell you 5. 2 going along the length of the channel, 2 going along the width of the water channel, 1 in the middle. So why not mention 5? Less yachil, you'll have to say we can't do that. Because if you manage that, sad, shekan, rekan, one second. So this sad shekan, so the species on all sides, they're like closing in on the middle one. So we don't need to have more than 3, so the length or the width is planted, right? We don't have to have both of them planted. So there's no question, Rav Zira. We can't plant them in a fashion that closes in everything in the actual patch. And 6 can't be planted in each border because then it'll be closed in by species on the border. So we don't need to do that. He asked, now what's the din? A border, can it save a type of yerek from being kilayim with a row of melon-like vegetables on the other side? Because ma'im zerayim b'Israel, when it comes to various seeds, they're saved by a gap of 10.5 amas. But the raised border is not going to save one species from the other, right? So even if a border separates them, you still need a sort of separation between them. So now, Moksha, now this row of melon-like vegetables, right? You need to. It's going to be separate. It's got a chumrah. It's going to be separate from the others by 12 amas. So like koshkin, how much more so? A border won't save the yirakas on one side from the melon vegetables on the other side, and maybe you do need a required difference and separation. The next question: Muksha atzmoi. This melon-like vegetable, what's the din? Can it save itself from kilayim if it's planted, let's say, on top of the border? Because when it comes to seeds of one kind of grain with seeds of another, they're saved with a gap of 10.5. Yet, they're not saved from the issue if one of them was planted on top of the border or something. They're not saved that way. The problem of one of them being on the border, let me just see what he says here. Yeah. You've got melons between the Egyptian beans, whatever he said. So the melon and whatever's similar to it, if you want to have vegetables between these melons, you need a 12 amma separation. Right? Rav Yochanan differentiates between Yirakas planted between melon-like, and then he says you need 12, and the ones melon-like species that are planted between other ones, other beans and so on, and then 8 amas gap is required. You don't need 12. Okay, let's carry on. So Ma'im, where am I up to? Then as far as the melon-like stuff, it's saved from 2 similar stuff with a gap of 8. Like Koshkin, how much more so should be saved by being planted on top of the border? You've got the required separation. Rav Yehuda Avodah of Matanya, he says, Vahen Han Kol Haloshon. Is that a valid kavachomer? I mean, it's not. So let's see what we said again. We said, look, if things which need 10 are not saved on the border, things which are saved with 8, how much more so that is not saved by being on the border? You hear that? Things which are 10 are saved on the border. So how much more so things that are 8 are not saved on the border? So that doesn't really make sense. But where is your kavachomer now? You're taking it the opposite. So Gemara says, you're right. If you need 8 amas, then you're right. You can't learn from the grades of kavachomer. But there is a kavachomer like this. This is what the kavachomer should be. My Israel, when it comes to planting different seeds nearby, different grains, so they're saved by 10.5. Yet, they're not saved from the Issur just because they were on top of a border. And these melons that are saved from a species, if they're separated by 12, like Hashkain, how much more so is not going to be saved by being on a border? And you're going to need a proper separation. Okay, how much more so it's not going to be saved? Okay. So he says the Gemara concludes based on the kavachomer. A border is not a separation as far as vegetables are concerned. If they're next to between melons, or according to Chizkiah, melon-like species planted between 2 other such species. Okay. Right. Next one.
Are we more concerned initially, like we said, by the appearance?
We usually are worried about appearance.
It doesn't seem to be the issue.
So these ones here, what's the problem? Seeds, whether you need 10 amas gap.
But yeah, we're more concerned about
moksha, which is melon-like vegetables. They do spread around. Urachus, he says, can't be planted between rows of melons unless the melons are separated by 12 amas. But melons may be planted between 2 other melon-like species as long as you've got 8 amas. Okay. Where are we now? Okay. Where are we? Mishnah, yeah? Cohen Zraim ein Zayin Baruga. You can't plant any type of seeds called Zraim, like those seeds in a garden patch. The Chobin Yuraka Zayin Baruga is types of vegetables that you can grow. If the seeds are called vegetables, Yurakas, that's what you can put in the garden patch. Now you got mustard and smooth beans, min Zraim, they're types of Zraim, and you can't plant them as one of these things in a patch. Afunin agamloinin, the large beans, min yerek are types of vegetables, they can be planted in the species as a patch. Now, when you've got a patch with a, let's say, 1 tefach high border, we're sitting at 13 or 18 species there, 12 on the border, 1 or 6 in the middle. You have a border that was 1 tefach high, but then it got eroded and now it's less than a tefach. Kosher, it's still okay. So all the species can be left there. Shaya kosher with chilas, it was there from the beginning, it was kosher from the beginning. About a furrow or water channel, they're 1 tefach deep, you can plant in any of these 3 types of seeds classed as Yurokos, right? The furrow or the water channel. Why? One on one side, one on the other side, and one in the middle. Right? So he says here, the Rosh learns that the furrow is not separated between species. You need a distance of 1.5 tvachim. But 3 species are being planted so near each other. How does that work? So the Rosh says the furrow and the channel are 6 tvachim wide, and all 3 species, each one planted in rows 1 tefach wide, can be planted in the actual furrow, 1 on each side of the furrow or channel, 1 in the middle, a gap of 1.5 tvachim between the middle ones and the ones which are on the other side. So he wants to say that's how you have your gaps which are required. Right? Okay. So even though usually, he says here, you can't put different species in an area surrounded by a fence, you can go in an area surrounded by 1 tefach vertical wall of this furrow. Okay. Right, let's carry on. Kol Mizraim. Right, you can't plant seeds like Zraim in the garden patch. You can only put that which is called Yerokos, right? Now we bring a brisa. Chadov afunin hashufin min Zraim. You got mustard and smooth beans. They're types of Zraim. Shazaron leyerek. If they're planted for the greens, you can't start putting them in a patch together with the other species. Okay, funin agamloin in a full of mitzri, the Egyptian bean, large beans, Shazarna zara. You sow them for their seeds. They're not classed. Sorry, they are classed as rhyme. You can't put them into a patch together with other species. Zaran yerek. If they're planted for the greens, then they're called Yerokos. And you can put them into a garden patch with other things. Other types of garden seeds that you can't eat. You sowed them for their seeds. You can put them into a garden patch together with other species. Okay, Nismait kosher. Right, if you have a border, it's a tefach height, but then it erodes, right, and now it's less than a tefach. It's still valid. That which you said, a border that's reduced in height, lizraim shabai. That's for, let's say, seeds that were already planted in the patch before the border got eroded. Also, to go now and to go and plant in it new seeds, that's forbidden. If you did transgress and you put new seeds in after the erosion, but if you went and did that after the erosion of the border, right? But the plants they were planted is still okay. So there are other permitted plants there. The ones that were planted permitted are still there, they can stay. The ones that you did later in violation are also allowed to stay. I understand. Let's say the second plants, the ones that you planted after the erosion, and you got uprooted. Fair enough. The ones that were there all along are fine. But Nekra Rishonim, the first ones you did okay. If they were uprooted after the second ones were planted, Hashniya Mahin, what's the deal about the second ones? Maybe they can only stay as long as the first lot of plants are there. But once you've uprooted the first plants, maybe the second ones have to go. Nishmi'ina minhada, we learn from the following. Hamita, you have a tummy bed. Shenid l'shtei aruchas shelo. Two of its long balls have been removed and replaced with new ones. And you made new ones. But you didn't change all the holes where the boards fit. You just made new boards and they fit into the same holes as what you had before. If the new boards break, tamei, the bed is still considered tamei. If the old boards are broken, tahira, the bed is tahir, even though the new boards are already attached to the bed. Because everything follows the din of the old boards. This tells me that as far as the status of the patch where you got the border that's eroding, right, depends on the plants that were there at the time it eroded. Nekru Ashneim, if the second plants were uprooted, Rishonim Mutarin, first plants are permitted. Nekru Rishonim, if the first plants are uprooted after the second ones were planted, then Ashneim Asurin, then the second plants are forbidden to be maintained. Okay, I think we will stop here, Rabbi Sai.